Today, July 1st, 2026, Canada is not just facing a trade review. Canada is facing a confidence test. And the dangerous part is this. The damage may begin before any deal is canceled, before any factory closes, and before most families even understand what changed. Because Donald Trump may not need to destroy USMCA to put Canada under pressure. He only needs one thing. He needs businesses to believe the rules might change. And once businesses stop trusting the rules, the economy starts reacting quietly. A factory delays expansion, a supplier freezes hiring, a farmer worries about the American market, a trucking company waits before buying new vehicles, a family sees car prices stay high, a retiree watches market volatility return. That is how a trade fight moves from Washington and Ottawa into Canadian paychecks, grocery bills, savings, and kitchen table stress. So let's be clear from the start. USMCA does not automatically end today. The agreement does not vanish overnight. But today matters because the review process can decide whether North America gets long-term certainty or whether Canada enters a new period of pressure, threats, tariffs, and business hesitation. And for Canada, hesitation is not harmless. Hesitation can cost jobs. Hesitation can cost investment. Hesitation can raise prices. Hesitation can weaken confidence in the future. USMCA stands for the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement. It replaced NAFTA, the trade deal that shaped North America for decades. Donald Trump renegotiated it, renamed it, and presented it as one of his biggest economic victories. But now, the same agreement Trump once celebrated can become a weapon of pressure again. That is the warning. Not that USMCA ends today. The warning is that Canada may enter a period where one Trump tariff threat can freeze investment, weaken business confidence, and push more costs onto ordinary families. This is why Canadians should pay attention. Canada sends roughly 3/4 of its goods exports to the United States. Recent trade data shows Canadian goods exports to the U.S. were more than 500 billion Canadian dollars in 2024. Total Canada-U.S. goods trade was reported above 900 billion Canadian dollars. That is not just a statistic. That is oil. That is autos. That is lumber. That is steel and aluminum. That is agriculture, electricity, machinery, chemicals, trucking, border towns, small businesses, and family income. So when someone says, this is just a trade agreement, they are missing the point. This is not just a government file. This is the road that carries a huge part of Canada's economy into the American market. And when that road becomes uncertain, businesses do not always crash. Sometimes they simply slow down. That is the part people miss. Imagine an auto parts company in Ontario. The owner is thinking about expanding the plant, buying new equipment, and hiring more workers. The bank is ready. The workers are ready. The town needs those jobs. Then the headlines begin. Trump may demand changes. Tariffs may return. Canada may face pressure. Mexico may become part of the bargaining fight. Ottawa may retaliate. Suddenly, that company does not need to shut down. It does not need to fire anyone tomorrow. It simply pauses. And that pause is where the damage begins. Because a factory that never expands does not create a dramatic headline. A job that never opens does not appear as a layoff. An apprenticeship that never starts does not show up in the unemployment numbers. But a family still loses that future. That is the hidden cost of uncertainty. And today's USMCA review is really about that hidden cost. Under the agreement's review process, Canada, the United States, and Mexico must look at the deal and decide whether they want to continue with long-term certainty. The agreement has a 16-year structure, but after 6 years, the countries review it. If all three confirm support, businesses get a clearer road ahead. If they do not, the deal can continue, but yearly reviews can hang over it. That sounds technical, but for a business owner, it is simple. Do I invest or do I wait? That one question can shape jobs across Canada. And this is why the review is not just about politicians. It is about confidence. A business can handle competition if the rules are clear. A factory can handle higher costs if the market is predictable. A farmer can plan around risk if contracts are stable. But what businesses fear most is not knowing what the rules will be next year. And North America depends on rules. A vehicle is not simply made in one country anymore. A part can be made in Canada, cross into the United States, move into Mexico, return through the United States, and then be sold to a Canadian or American family. Some parts cross borders more than once before a car reaches a dealership. So when a politician says, put tariffs on another country, it sounds simple. But inside North America, the other country is often part of your own supply chain. Tax a Canadian part, and an American factory may pay more. Disrupt Mexican assembly, and a Canadian supplier may lose orders. Retaliate against U.S. goods, and American farmers may suffer. Raise costs on steel and aluminum, and construction, vehicles, machinery, and household prices can all feel it. This is not like cutting off a distant rival. Canada, the United States, and Mexico build together, and when one side hits the system, everyone feels the shock. Before we go deeper, I want to ask you something simple. Which worries you more right now? Tariffs, jobs, grocery prices, or Canada becoming too dependent on Washington? Because that is the real debate underneath this story. For Donald Trump, trade is not just economics, it is leverage. His message has always been easy to understand. America was treated unfairly, factories left, workers were abandoned, foreign countries benefited, and tariffs can bring power back to the United States. That message works because many workers did feel abandoned. They saw factories close. They saw towns decline. They saw wages struggle. They heard politicians talk about global growth while their own communities lost opportunity. So when Trump says he will fight for American workers, people listen. But the economic reality is more complicated. Tariffs can protect some industries for a while, but they can also raise prices, increase costs for manufacturers, trigger retaliation, hurt exporters, and make inflation harder to control. And if there is one thing families in Canada and the United States do not need right now, it is another force pushing costs higher. Think about how a tariff moves through real life. A company pays more for parts. That company raises prices, cuts margins, delays hiring, or pressures suppliers. A supplier cuts overtime. A worker has less income. A family delays buying a car. A senior sees the cost of repairs, groceries, and household goods rise again. Nobody at the kitchen table says, "A trade review changed my budget," but they feel the result. That is why this moment is so serious for Prime Minister Mark Carney. Carney is not entering this fight as a normal politician who only understands slogans. His background is central banking, inflation, markets, currencies, financial stability, and crisis management. He understands that confidence can disappear quickly. He understands that investors often move before governments finish explaining themselves. He understands that a weaker Canadian dollar can make imported goods more expensive before many families understand why. But Trump is not only an economic challenge, Trump is a political pressure machine. He negotiates in public. He raises the temperature. He creates headlines. He makes threats feel immediate. Then he looks for concessions. So Carney has a narrow road. If he sounds too soft, Canadians may believe Ottawa is letting Washington push the country around. If he sounds too aggressive, businesses may fear a full trade war. If he says Canada must reduce dependence on the United States, many Canadians will agree in theory. But companies that depend on American customers today will ask the practical question, what do we do this year, not 10 years from now? That is Canada's hard reality. The United States is Canada's biggest opportunity and Canada's biggest vulnerability. For decades, being next to the United States was one of Canada's greatest advantages. Canada had access to the richest consumer market in the world. It had a peaceful border. It had integrated supply chains. It had energy exports, auto production, farming, trucking, services, and manufacturing built around that relationship. But the Trump era exposed a hard truth. If your biggest customer becomes unpredictable, your entire business model becomes exposed. One election in Washington can change the mood. One tariff threat can freeze investment. One statement from the White House can make a boardroom delay a decision. And that is why this USMCA review is bigger than one trade deal. It is about whether Canada can keep relying so heavily on the United States when American politics keep swinging between free trade and economic nationalism. Now bring this down to real life. The first impact is jobs. Autos in Ontario, steel and aluminum, lumber in British Columbia, energy in Alberta, farming in Saskatchewan and Manitoba, trucking across the border, small manufacturers in Quebec, machinery, chemicals, food processing, and local suppliers across the country. These are not just sectors. They are families. They are pensions. They are mortgage payments. They are small towns where one plant, one mill, one mine, one farm contract, or one border customer can support hundreds of households. If uncertainty grows, companies may not leave immediately. That is why the damage can be hard to see at first. But they may stop expanding, and that matters, because the most dangerous job loss is sometimes the job Canada never gets. The new plant that is not announced, the new shift that is not added, the new contract that goes somewhere else, the young worker who leaves town because opportunity never came. That is how uncertainty steals from the future without making noise. The second impact is prices. Politicians often describe tariffs as if foreign countries simply pay the bill. But in real life, tariffs often act like an added cost on goods, parts, materials, and finished products. If steel and aluminum cost more, construction can cost more. If auto parts cost more, cars and repairs can cost more. If agricultural trade is disrupted, grocery pressure can increase. If energy equipment becomes more expensive, infrastructure can become more expensive. If the Canadian dollar weakens because investors become nervous, imported goods can cost more too. For families already dealing with rent, mortgage payments, insurance, heating bills, groceries, and car costs, even small increases matter. For seniors on fixed incomes, this is not a theory. It can become a question of whether savings stretch far enough, whether grocery choices change, whether repairs get delayed, whether retirement feels less secure. That is why trade policy is not boring. It is personal. The third impact is business confidence. This may be the most important point in the entire story. An economy does not grow only because governments sign agreements. It grows because people believe the future is stable enough to take a risk. A factory owner takes a risk. A farmer buys equipment. A trucking company adds vehicles. A young person starts training. A bank approves financing. A supplier hires workers. But when the rules feel unstable, everyone becomes cautious, and caution can spread. One company waits, then another waits, then another. Suddenly, the country is not collapsing, but it is not moving forward either. That kind of slowdown is frustrating because nobody can point to one single event. Prices remain high, jobs feel weaker, investment feels slower, confidence feels thin, and people start asking why life feels harder even when the trade deal still exists. The answer is uncertainty. The fourth impact is Canada's bargaining power. Canada can negotiate. Canada can retaliate. Canada can diversify. Canada has energy, food, critical minerals, water, skilled workers, ports, rail, and a strategic location. But Canada cannot ignore the United States. The U.S. is too close, too large, and too important. At the same time, Canada can no longer assume Washington will always be predictable. That old assumption is gone. And this is where Mexico becomes important. Many companies are already looking for alternatives to China. They want production closer to North American customers. This is called nearshoring. Mexico can benefit because it has lower wages, manufacturing capacity, and direct access to the U.S. market under USMCA. That can strengthen North America, but it can also squeeze Canada. If Washington pressures Canada and Mexico attracts more factories, Canada could lose the next round of investment, not because Canada has no strengths, but because companies go where the numbers, rules, and certainty make sense. That is the uncomfortable part. Canada is not only competing with China or Europe, Canada is competing inside North America too. And if Canada wants to win future jobs, it needs more than speeches. It needs faster project approvals, better infrastructure, stronger ports, more reliable rail, less internal trade friction between provinces, a serious energy strategy, stronger critical minerals development, and a clearer plan for manufacturers. Canada cannot simply say, we need to diversify, and then move slowly. Because the world is not moving slowly. China is fighting for manufacturing power. Europe is protecting key industries. India is rising. The United States is using tariffs and industrial policy. Countries are competing for energy, food, batteries, semiconductors, artificial intelligence, rare earths, steel, aluminum, and supply chains. In this new world, trade is not just about cheaper goods. Trade is power. Energy is power. Food is power. Manufacturing is power. Supply chains are power. Critical minerals are power. Countries that control strategic industries have more freedom. Countries that depend too heavily on others have less room to move. That is the larger lesson for Canada. A stable USMCA is valuable. Canada should not casually damage the relationship with the United States. It is too important. But Canada also cannot build its future on hope that every future U.S. administration will be calm, predictable, and friendly. That is not a strategy. That is a gamble. So what happens now? There are three possible paths. The first path is the calm path. Canada, the United States, and Mexico send a clear signal that USMCA will continue with long-term confidence. Businesses relax, markets steady, investment continues, workers get more certainty, families get less reason to worry. That is the best path. The second path is the messy path. The agreement survives, but the three countries do not give businesses enough confidence. The deal remains in place, but reviews and threats keep coming back. There is no instant collapse, but uncertainty slowly weakens investment. That is the slow risk path. The third path is the dangerous path. Trump demands major changes. Canada and Mexico resist. Tariffs escalate. Retaliation begins. North America enters another trade fight. Prices rise. Businesses pull back. Farmers, factory towns, small businesses, truckers, consumers, and retirees all feel the pressure. That is the path Canada must avoid if possible, but prepare for if necessary. So what should Canadians watch next? Watch Trump's language. If he talks about improving USMCA, that suggests negotiation. If he talks about replacing it, punishing partners, or using tariffs broadly, the risk rises. Watch Carney's tone. If he stays calm and strategic, he may be trying to protect business confidence. If Ottawa starts preparing strong retaliation, that means Canada sees a real threat. Watch the sectors. Autos, steel, aluminum, lumber, energy, agriculture, machinery, border-dependent manufacturing. If those sectors become targets, the story becomes real very quickly. Watch business behavior. Are companies expanding in Canada or waiting? Are factories hiring or slowing down? Are investors making long-term commitments or keeping money on the sidelines? And watch the Canadian dollar. Currency markets often react before ordinary people see the full effect. A weaker dollar can help some exporters, but it can also make imported goods more expensive. The biggest mistake would be to treat USMCA like a boring government file. It is not. It is connected to the worker in Windsor, the farmer in Saskatchewan, the energy producer in Alberta, the lumber worker in British Columbia, the manufacturer in Ontario, the small business owner in Quebec, the truck driver crossing the border, the retiree wondering why life keeps getting more expensive, and the family asking whether Canada still has control over its economic future. This is why July 1st matters, not because the deal automatically ends today, but because this review begins a pressure cycle. It can restore confidence, or it can create a long shadow. And in today's economy, confidence can be almost as important as policy itself. If businesses believe the rules are stable, they invest. If they believe the rules are unstable, they wait. And if enough businesses wait, ordinary people pay the price. So the real question is not simply, will USMCA survive? The real question is, what kind of North America survives? A stable one that builds together, competes with China and Europe, protects jobs, and gives families some certainty? Or a fractured one where every election brings a new tariff threat, every industry waits for the next fight, and ordinary people keep paying for political drama? Canada has choices. It can stay calm without being weak. It can defend workers without creating panic. It can protect the U.S. relationship without pretending Washington will always be predictable. It can build new trade options without abandoning the market that still matters most. But it has to move with seriousness. Because the next generation of Canadian jobs will not wait forever. The next factory will not wait forever. The next investment decision will not wait forever. And families already under pressure do not have endless patience. For Canada, this may be one of the most important economic tests of the next decade. Trump's pressure may force Canada to answer a question it has avoided for too long. Can Canada remain deeply tied to the United States and still build enough independence to protect itself? That is the real story. Not just tariffs, not just Trump, not just Carney, not just one trade review. This is about whether Canada can protect jobs, prices, savings, and national confidence in a world where even allies use economic pressure. If you want clear, serious updates on Canada's economy, trade fights, jobs, prices, and the decisions that could shape the country your children and grandchildren inherit, subscribe now and turn on notifications. And I want to leave you with one clear question. Should Canada keep the United States as its main economic anchor, or is it finally time to build a future less dependent on American politics?